My dad was a big person. I don't mean in the physical sense, which he was, but that his presence was undeniable. He had a way of coming into a room and letting everyone know that they were important. Through a combination of warmth, earnestness, and truly awful, reaching puns, he would show people that he was ready to be their friend. And he was. Wherever he went, he left a trail of genuine friends in his wake. Just from my perspective, speaking to my friends who knew him, to their parents, to my coaches years and years later, and to his business associates who I've known for most of my life, almost all of them would impress upon me how special and important my dad was to them. And it wasn't just charm. He was smart and funny, honest and trustworthy, dependable. And he was generous. He would do anything to take care of people he cared about. And he cared about a lot of people. For some, it was just an open ear and a real interest in what they had to say. For others, like family in need, it was a willingness to help, to solve problems, to get people out of hard situations. For me and my mom, it was everything. Throughout my life, he gave me so much that sometimes all I could do was shrug and accept it. I never had to worry about whether he loved me or whether he'd back me up if I really needed it. He was a rock. He was a steady presence that I could always count on to be a sturdy ally and my biggest fan as I poked my head out into the world. When I played football and wrestled in high school, he was always there, always invested, always doing everything he could to help me succeed. Even when I was trying to focus before a match, he'd be hanging around nearby. And when he would irritate me by summoning me over for a pep talk, I always knew it was because he was climbing out of his skin, wanting to help me in any way he could. It may come to us as a surprise that my dad was naturally an introvert, which is something we shared. The gregarious persona that everyone saw that served him so well in life and in business was something that he had to learn, that he had to create in himself, because that was the person he wanted to be. In that sense, and in several others, my dad was a self-made man. He didn't always have the easiest time growing up. His father, Frank Powell, came back from the war with mental and physical trauma and left when my father was very young. His mother, Virginia, or Mama Jit, as I knew her, loved him but struggled to raise him on her own. And when she married Jack Rousey, he provided for them, but there was always some distance. Everybody knew he was Virginia's boy. He was loved by many people, though. His grandmama and granddaddy, his numerous aunts and uncles in Rome, his step-grandfather, Elmer Rousey. And when his sisters, Sandy and Joe, came along, he loved them, and they loved him too. There was a lot of love around him, but he always missed his daddy. That's something he made sure I never really had to worry about. Not till now. When Virginia and Jack got married, they moved to Ben Hill on the west side of Atlanta, and my dad grew up there. Along the way, he went to Therrell High School, played football, wrestled, put some shot, and got up to some ridiculous nonsense with Mike Fuss and Steve Ziegler. When they all graduated, my dad had a decision to make. It turns out that he was actually a Georgia Tech kid growing up. He was always smart enough for it, but he was terrified of the drown-proofing class they required back then. And anyways, most of the guys he knew were going to Georgia, so there he went. After the Terry College of Business, he spent a little bit of time in law school, then found his way to the job market. He told the recruiter that he would work in any industry except insurance. The recruiter agreed, but then asked him to go on an interview with Royal Globe Insurance because the hiring manager was a friend and he wanted feedback. Well, they offered him a company car, and that was it. It turns out my dad had a real talent for public sector insurance. He loved the game of it. He loved being able to go to these city councils and sheriff's departments and teach them what their needs were, show them that he could trust them to look out for them, and when the rubber met the road, prove that to be true. In 1983, he and Dave Van Dyke founded Charterhouse, an independent underwriting firm, which served cities and counties throughout the Southeast. It was a small family of agents, each basically in charge of a state, and my dad was the engine of its success. Through thick and thin, feast or famine, he drove the boom and held the ship together. He put everything he could into that work, and in so doing, made sure that our family and all the families of Charterhouse were taken care of. And even after they sold Charterhouse, for the rest of his life, he made sure that wherever he went, the people who stuck with him had a place in his company. Such was his loyalty. In 1977, my dad was in a singles bar with a friend. When he looked over and saw a table with 3 ladies, his friend got up, as was the custom in the place, and went to ask one of them to dance. While that was going on, my dad caught the eye of one of her friends and pointed to her and pointed to him. It went like this. The lady was, of course, way to center fit. And as she danced with him, she was thinking, isn't this guy too young? But she kept dancing with him, and 2 years later they were married. And a year after that, in 1980, there was me. I loved my dad. It seems obvious to say, but I really cherished who he was. His sense of humor was a joy to be around, even when it manifested in terrible puns. One of his favorite things, I think, was when he'd lay one of those on me, and I'd make a face or roll my eyes or something, and then crack and start laughing because I couldn't contain it. He was a tremendous guide, too. I learned a lot from him about how to navigate the world, how to deal with tough situations, how to do adult things. It's hard to overstate the benefit of always being able to get practical life advice from somebody who really understands business, leadership, negotiation, contracts, insurance, and so on. I feel like I'm a relatively savvy adult almost entirely because of his guidance and example. And a large portion of the many advantages I've had in my life have been because he worked so hard, he took care of us so well. Even when he was gone a lot on business trips when I was little, I was never troubled by it. Because I recognized he was doing something important, and he was doing it for us. I also appreciated his enthusiasm for things. We went to a lot of movies when I was a kid, and through that I absorbed an expansive sense of what made them great. The ones that really stuck with him were sometimes funny, but almost always smart and with a lot of heart. And as the years went on, it became pretty clear that the ones that I really loved and cherished were by and large the same ones he did. My dad also loved the University of Georgia. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more earnest and loyal Bulldog fan than Del Powell. When they built a new athletics facility, he gave them so much money, they put his name on a plaque on a bench. When he finished the basement in our house, he had them put in the exact same red carpet they used in the locker rooms. He had season tickets for as long as I can remember. And when I was little, I would go with him to most of the home games in Athens. Not because I cared so much or about football or strictly understood what was going on, but because his enthusiasm and the energy of the place were so infectious. He loved to go there on Saturday morning and spend the day with friends or wandering around the city and just soaking up the atmosphere, pageantry, and excitement. So even after going to Georgia Tech, I can still feel a sense of pride and nostalgia when I visit Athens. And I think he understood that. Because as much of a fan of Georgia as he was also a fan of me. When I went to Georgia Tech, he responded with pride and hope for what I could achieve. And when I naturally switched my football allegiance, he took it in the spirit of good-natured, friendly rivalry that underpins the best of the college sports experience. We both relished that, I think. And when Sarah and I got together with him and my friend Will to go to the Tech Georgia game, and even though we were on opposite sides, he made sure we understood that he loved having us with us. We loved having us with him, and he wanted to show us the best of what the city had to offer. Usually, if you ask me, what's the good word, I'll give you the correct answer. But not today. When my dad had cancer in 2004, he said, as I learned later, that all he wanted to do was live long enough to hold my child. To that end, he endured chemotherapy and a surgery that changed the entire shape of his body. And it worked. Our daughter Sophia was born in 2008, and our son Alex in 2010, and he loved them dearly. And they loved their grandpa Dell. When my dad died, it was a shock. He'd had various ongoing health problems, of course, but nothing that implied an immediate risk for what happened. It felt like there was a hole in everything, with no way to prepare and no way to fix it. We were in the middle of the process of letting go of my grandmother, and being blindsided by another loss was really hard to take. It's been especially hard for my mom, surrounded by memories of him, and missing the chance to look over and talk to him as she was so accustomed. She wanted me to thank Dwight Bryant, her brother of choice, for coming in from South Carolina to be with her over this past week. Sometime in the 1970s, my dad met Bob Bullock. He was another insurance man and a Georgia fan, and the two of them were friends for decades. When Bob died in the early 2000s, my dad went up to make a speech at his memorial service. He told stories about Bob, about how he would cut the tails off of roadkill squirrels to tie fishing lures with the fur. He described Bob as a friend for life. And then, at the end, he told about an old football cheer that Bob had taught him. As soon as he said this, I knew what he was going to do, because I have clear memories of being taught this cheer, about 4 years old, in the kitchen at Jimmy Forth's house. And at that moment, when he gave that tribute to his friend, when he created a huge cathartic moment for everyone in the room, and all I could do was sit there and admire the risk that he was willing to take for everyone, I knew that someday I would have to do the same for him. I don't think you're ever going to hear me do this again. But today, Dad, this is for you. Alla vivo, alla vivo, alla vivo, vivo, vum. Johnny get a rat trap bigger than a cat trap, bigger than a big bass drum. Hannibal, cannibal, sis boom ba, Georgia, Georgia, rah, rah, rah. Go dogs, sick 'em.